Hi, everyone. Welcome back to What They Don't Say. Today, we have a very special guest named Brent Patrick. Thank you so much for being here, Brent. Now, this name most likely is one that all of you have not heard before, but by the end of this episode, not only are you going to absolutely love Brent, but you're also going to learn a lot about some things that Lauren and I are unable to speak on. So, Brent spent 3 years as a law enforcement officer investigating child abuse, and for the past 6 years, he has been the chief operations officer at the Gulf Coast Children's Advocacy Center. Hi, Brent. Thank you so much for being here.
Awesome. Thank y'all for letting me join you.
Yay. Okay. So, with that, we're just going to dive right in. Now, to begin, we kind of want our audience members to just get an idea of who you are, Brent, and what your role is at Gulf Coast and how you got into that position.
Yeah. So, how I got here is probably a bit different than most. I had an amazing childhood with amazing parents, and always wanted to have a career where I gave back to a community and really got vested into that community. So, after being a business owner for a little while, I had the opportunity to jump into that public service and join the law enforcement. And I did that through our local sheriff's office and become a law enforcement officer. I was a patrol deputy for just about a year when I was able to get an opportunity to be a criminal investigator at our local sheriff's office. And I spent 4 days being a property crime investigator until the captain of the division found out that my wife and I were involved with children in our local church and said, "Hey, I think you'd be really good at this." And I said, "I don't even know what that means." I didn't know that children were abused, and I certainly didn't know that adults were sexually assaulted. It wasn't something that I just didn't know about, and it wasn't ignorance of my parents. It just wasn't something that I was aware of. So I came into the Children's Advocacy Center on my first day and quickly found out that the need was much greater than what I could ever imagine. And I truly feel like for this time in my life, I have found the purpose of my existence and why I need to be here.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think it's really important to have people like you who maybe haven't personally experienced sexual assault or child abuse or things like that within these positions because, as someone who has been through all this, it's really easy to care. Like it's really easy to care because like I experienced the trauma, like Shannon experienced the
Mhm.
trauma, but it's hard to sometimes get other people to care or understand when they haven't been through it. And so I just commend you for taking that on and like coming into this position despite the fact that like it wasn't something you'd personally dealt with. And I just think that's really, really important to have in these communities. And I feel like we don't really talk about that much, if
Yeah,
that makes sense.
no, it certainly does. It's a different perspective to bring to the game. Obviously,
Mhm.
I spent almost 3 years doing investigations of nothing but child abuse and sexual violence, and then the executive director of the Children's Advocacy Center and the Rape Crisis Center here asked me one day if I would be willing to move into an administrative role on part of that team at the Children's Advocacy Center and the Rape Crisis Center. And I just knew that was going to be an incredible opportunity to, I've always said putting people in jail is such an amazing part of the system, and it holds people accountable for what they do. And it shows survivors that somebody believes them, but handcuffs don't fix anything. And it's something that I've said from the very beginning. And when I got the opportunity to come in and be a part of what happens after that arrest and what happens after a survivor tells their story was something that I just knew would be something that I I could impact more and be more to the people that I wanted to do. So like you said earlier, I've been doing that almost 7 years now in this role. So I do bring a very different perspective to our line of work. I'm not a social worker. You can ask any of the 110 staff that I work for. That's not who I am. I am the one that wants somebody to be held accountable. But I'm able to stay very fact driven, and I
Mhm.
don't. I have the opportunity to not always get tied into the emotions of what's going on too.
But we need that. We need someone who's that backbone and who, I can imagine that it's incredibly hard to deal with these cases day in and day out and hear stories. There's a lot of emotional appeal in this, right? But even as an outsider, like Lauren and I never really thought like assault can't be that bad. Like it was one of those things of like, there's no way that it can really be that bad. But once you start to hear and dive into all those stories day in and day out, you're like, it is that bad. And I think it's awesome that you took action in that. And it wasn't just something that you came to know, but it was also something that you came to change. So could you tell our audience a little bit more about what Gulf Coast Children's Advocacy Center is? You know, it's such an incredible organization. Lauren and I have been trying to put into words everything that you guys do, and it's so hard because in my head, I'm like, you guys promote change and you are literally changing people's lives for the better, advocating for people who can't advocate for themselves. But could you just give our audience a little bit of a background on the organization as a whole?
Yeah, I used to say I have an elevator speech, but now it's multi floors and it takes a long time. So I'll condense it down. But the Children's Advocacy Center here is in Circuit 14 in the state of Florida. So we cover 6 counties of the state of Florida, and we have locations in all 6 of those counties. We've been in existence for almost 20 years. We are a staff of over 110. And those services really start from gestation. We do a lot of in-home maternal health. If you don't know, parents who are bonded to their children are much less likely to abuse them. So when we had the opportunity to take that role over and start with in-home services to parents who were either small children or mothers who are pregnant, we really jumped on that and turned that into a prevention service to try to keep children out of the system of care. We have a program we call Parents as Teachers, and that is a program where we do in-home services with parents, and we're teaching them to be their child's first teacher. Kids don't come with a book to tell us how to raise them, and they definitely don't tell us what we need to have them prepared for when they get ready to go to kindergarten. So we do that, and that also helps with a lot of ages and stages of development and all the things with behavior and just creating that bond between parents. It can be just as simple as sitting down on the floor and teaching a parent how important it is to read to their children and what that does for a child's development in their brain. And then our services go from there all the way up into the actual investigative portions through our child protection team. And through the state of Florida, it is required if children meet 8 criteria: the egregious physical abuse, obviously the sexual abuse, medical neglect, some significant mental injury. They're to be seen by an outside entity through our agency, and those are the people who do the forensic interviews of children. Those are specialized programs and staff who are really well trained in asking children questions in a very specific way so that the child hearsay rule does not come in effect. So their statement to our staff is their testimony in trial, which is really cool. That's in a really controlled environment, and they get to build a rapport with one individual person in a place that looks like a child belongs, and it's not in a police station or back of a police car. Obviously, we have the medical staff, we have the doctors and the nurse practitioners and the RNs that do all the evaluations of children, and our doctors are able to actually diagnose child abuse. So that is a big thing for the investigative portion. And then huge portion of our staff are advocates. So those are the people who meet you the day that you walk in the door and you're a survivor of child abuse or sexual violence. And we have a program, we call it vertical advocacy. It's something that we kind of thought up. I don't say we, my boss, Lori Allen, really said, hey, this is something that I want to do. How can we make this work? And we really sit down and said, we want the person that they see the first day they walk in the door to be the same person they see on their trial date, and to see them all the way through that process so that they can really create that rapport and feel comfortable telling their stories, and they don't have to tell it over and over and over again. We know that's a terrible thing that a lot of adults and children have to do. And then we have a significant amount of our staff that spends time teaching curriculum to children in schools about what is abuse and what is neglect. And that goes all the way down to like cyberbullying. That's obviously an important thing. The mental health part of that comes in. And then we also are a certified rape crisis center, and we serve 10 counties in the state of Florida. So from Pensacola all the way to St. Joe, so Gulf County. And we have service offices in all 10 of those counties, and advocates and sane nurses who cover those areas, who provide services to adults who are survivors of sexual assaults, whether that be when they were adults. So it could be an acute, or it could have happened 20 years ago, or it could have happened when they were children. We'll help them either way. And we have a huge therapy program where our agency provides trauma therapy to all survivors of adult sexual abuse or child abuse or child sexual abuse. And that's trauma focused therapy. Hopefully it's short term. We don't do med management or behavior therapy. It's specific to just that. And that's a team of 23 people.
We are such
Wow.
big fans of the Gulf Coast organization as a whole, like everything you guys do. One thing that I find particularly like something that's very relatable for us and probably relatable for a lot of our audience is that vertical advocacy that you're talking about. Because, as a victim of sexual assault, you never really know who's going to have your back. You hope that your parents will, especially if you're a young child, you hope that your friends will be there to support you. And you hope that wherever you go to report it, that they'll believe you and respect you. But it's not always the case. So to know that somebody who were to walk through your doors, the first person they talk to is going to be with them for the entire journey, no matter how, like, no matter the outcome, that is so incredible. And I really wish that we had had that opportunity when we were going through the court process as well.
Takes a lot of buy-in from community members to do that, to be honest with you. Obviously, all, police department, sheriff's office, prosecutor's office all have their own advocates that do specific jobs, and we've come to a really cool agreement here to say our advocates will be solely responsible for everything with our clients, so that we don't do the pass off thing. You don't have a advocate for just this part of it, and then you get a different advocate for this part, and then an advocate for trial. It's the same person. Because I know you've talked about how you had to tell your story over and over and over again, and that's obviously something that we want to limit as much as we possibly can.
Yeah, I think that is really important. And like within thinking about that too, even obviously having one advocate with you through the whole process, whatever that process looks like for you, is so vital too. Because I just remember when we were going through the court process, I had to tell my story over and over so many times. And like, yeah, I guess you could say it was exposure therapy or whatever, but it really wasn't. Like, it just numbed me to what I had been through so that I could just get through this kind of process over and over and over again instead of actually taking the time to work with one person and like have these really important conversations, have conversations that promote healing and helping. It was more just like a thing that you had to go through over and over. And it was just, I feel like it did a lot more harm than good. And I think that is something that we kind of just glaze over when we're thinking about these processes and just the importance of having those victim advocates by these survivors' side every step of the way and ensuring that it's consistent too.
Yeah, I think something that we miss sometimes in the system of care as a whole is that it's not just about the incident that happened. It's a holistic approach to helping survivors get to their next step. And for adults, it's, do they have somewhere to sleep tonight? Do
Mhm.
they have a consistent way to eat? My therapists and my clinical directors are always saying, I can't help somebody get better if they don't have food to eat. And so our advocates really take that as a big responsibility. We do needs assessments with these clients, and we sit down and say, what is it that you need? Obviously, the person who may assaulted you may be the person who's paying the bills at home. And now they're in jail, and you're going to be without a home in a month or a couple days, and you're not going to have anything to eat because the power and control goes in. They don't have a job, they don't have access to vehicles or money or all those things. So it advocacy is not just sitting beside you when you go to depositions or just sitting beside you when you go to a courtroom and you have to tell your story. It's truly advocating so that that person can be the best version of themselves that they can be.
I'm kind of curious. So, if an adult were to come in, obviously many people have access to cell phones and they could be, conversing back and forth with their advocate that way. But if a child were to come into Gulf Coast, what does that communication look like between the advocate and a child?
Yeah, so it looks different all the time in every scenario. Obviously, older children, we can communicate with them, but we've come up with a couple tools that I think help us with that. So obviously, if a 5 or 6 year old child comes in as a victim survivor of sexual assault, our staff's not communicating directly. Our advocates are not directly communicating with the child. We're communicating with the non-offending caregiver, the person who supports that child. But a lot of those children that we see come to our therapy. So our advocates go down and meet with them while they're there. We try to get down there at least once a month so that we see them face to face. That way, when we show up for deposition the first time, it's not the first time a kid ever sees that person outside of the time that they originally came to our center to make their disclosure to our child protection team. So we've come up with a few things. If we have kids who are not in therapy in our programs, we try to Zoom, do some kind of video call with the parent and say, hey, can you just pop them on and let me say hey to them real quick? I carry a caseload myself as an advocate. I feel like that's important for me to still be in the work. And obviously, I'm not a small guy. There's not many men in my line of work. So I try to come up with just innovative ways. If it's just asking them to come in and sit down with me and color a picture or something simple, just so they don't see me as this big scary person who they've only seen one time, and they probably really didn't get to interact with me much anymore. Obviously, most of the children that I'm advocates for tell everybody I'm their security guard.
Oh. You're just a big teddy bear, Brent. That's what I think. That's probably what they
Yeah,
think.
I don't yeah, I hope they think that, but I hope they also know that the links of what I would go through to ensure that the system works the way that it's supposed to work, and all the protection that those survivors are legally able to have, that I would ensure that they have those with all of my ability.
Yeah, that's amazing. To kind of build off of talking about these systems and ensuring that victims are protected in the ways that they should be, you know, on this podcast and just, within different conversations me and Shannon have had, and also just conversations I've had with other survivors. We've talked about how there can be a lot of mistreatment of victims by law enforcement when they do go and report. And, when we met with you previously, you really talked about this relationship that you guys, as in Gulf Coast, have built with, prosecutors have built with, the Justice Department as a whole in the area. And I was wondering if you could kind of just talk a little bit more broadly about that and how you have, used your role as coming from someone in law enforcement into the role you are now, and how you kind of bridge that gap between law enforcement and sexual assault justice, and how you're kind of, even, I would say, creating more of a trusting system where you guys are.
It's probably my favorite part of my job. Um, and obviously, there's some things that I can say that maybe other people in this role can't say. I'm still a sworn law enforcement officer. I still have a badge, a gun, and a set of handcuffs, and can still get in a patrol car and do police work if I want to. And that's something that I'm grateful to have access to, because it allows me to continue to have some sometimes hard conversations with law enforcement officers. And I think it's important to remember I can say sometimes I've been there, uh,
Mhm.
but there's a couple of things to this. Sometimes the public doesn't understand the amount of stress and the amount of pressure that's placed on law enforcement officers who are working these major cases. And I've had this conversation with people a lot of times. Really all it takes to put somebody in prison for life in the state of Florida is a kid telling a story in my legal name at the bottom of a piece of paper. And that's a huge liability for me. And it's a huge liability for law enforcement officers all across this country. Sometimes us as advocates and social workers say it's really simple. And although it may seem really simple, it's not as simple as people want to make it out to be sometimes. And it's a lot of heavy weight that these law enforcement officers hold on their back when they are taking and saying that somebody committed a crime. That, you know, from the time that they say that starts the process of someone having a lifelong effect from that. Not more important than what the survivor has gone through, though. And I think that's sometimes the conversations we have to have. And our community, especially our law enforcement community, has bought into some of our crazy ideas. I think people think they're crazy when they come up and then they see it work. The national statistics about them, the number of people who are charged with a sex crime and then convicted of it, are quite frankly deplorable. And it's so sad. And we take that as a responsibility of our agency to say, we can do it better, and we do it better. Not me, not Lori. Our team does it phenomenal. And it's so cool to watch a community buy into the things that we come up with and say, hey, if we do it this way, I promise you, we'll get better outcomes. And it's better outcomes for law enforcement officers because their job is to protect our community. And we want to make sure that those people are held accountable so that, people who rape people, what do they do again when they get out? They have the opportunity. We know what the recidivism rate is. It's 100%. And we want to make sure that recidivism rate doesn't happen and cause someone else to have to go through that trauma. But for law enforcement, you have to provide some value to them, and they have to know when they call any of the 5 hotlines that this agency has, that somebody's going to answer the phone, and that's going to be somebody here, hopefully somebody that they've seen before, because we're constantly in their offices talking to them. but they want to know when they call, it's, hey, this is what I got going on. I don't know what to do. And our staff says, don't worry, we got it.
Mhm.
And just show up with them. Yeah, we try to schedule cases when it's, child abuse and they're in a safe environment, but you can ask any of the law enforcement officers in this community. If they showed up right now, it's 2:23 in the afternoon and said, hey, I need 15 kids interviewed. I have an army of staff who would not bat an eye to say, bring them. And they'd stay until whatever time of night tomorrow. Um, and their supervisors and our administration team would be there. I mean, our HR director, you don't know how many times I walk by our office and she's holding a baby rocking it. It's not just those who are advocates or just forensic interviewers. It's the entire staff who are willing to jump in because they know that our law enforcement community really backs up the work that we do, because they see what the outcome is when they call our agency and say, I've got this. Because we want to make sure that a survivor knows what's going to happen when it goes to talk to law enforcement. And we have to have very honest, blunt conversations with law enforcement sometimes to be like, if you want us to get victims and survivors to cooperate with this, we really need to know how you're going to do investigations. We need to know some of those hard questions so that we can be honest with our survivors and say, here's the questions you're going to be asked. And let me tell you why they have to ask these questions. What you are wearing, not important. It doesn't give anybody the right to do anything to you. But that question has to be asked.
Mm.
It just has to. And we try to explain to them why that's important, because we're going to have to explain it to a jury. These are 6 people that sit on a jury that have no idea what's going on. And we need to make sure that we explain those things. So you're going to have to answer those hard questions. And that's what our staff works so hard to be able to do, is to create relationships with these law enforcement officers. So when we sit down with our survivors and say, hey, if you want to go for adults, you want to go report this to law enforcement, here's what this looks like. Here's the questions you're going to have to ask. Here's the process. Here's what the questions are going to be from the prosecutor when we get to that point. And quite frankly, here's the questions that a defense attorney is going to ask you in a deposition or a trial. Our job is to prepare them for that, with advocacy and if they want therapy. And we do tons of training with law enforcement. I can't tell you how many hours our agency has put into training law enforcement, and that really goes to all of our staff. Obviously, I teach some trauma informed investigation skills to our local law enforcement, because I can use a lot of case examples where, quite frankly, I messed it up really, really, really bad. And hopefully they can learn from my mistakes, and even some of the things that I did well, because the system of care was there to support me in those efforts too.
So what I'm kind of hearing is that, there's probably a myriad of reasons why some people have had bad experiences with law enforcement when reporting sexual assault. But one of the reasons that those negative experiences are decreased in your area is because you started with the relationship, right? It's not just law enforcement is on their own to figure it out. It's, they've got a lot on their plate. And in order to help carry that weight and make everyone's lives better and experiences better is by pairing with you. You've built that relationship, which I'm sure has taken years and years and years. It didn't just start here. And it took law enforcement being open to critique and to more information from you guys and vice versa. And in turn, you've been able to help so many more people and help people to be more informed. And, as the process as a whole is incredibly scary when you're going through any form of judicial process for assault. But not having that information is one of the things that I think makes that experience even scarier. And so you guys are trying to bridge that gap, and more organizations should look to law enforcement to be able to build a relationship with them.
Yeah, you
Mhm.
have to hold yourself to a standard that's really high. That's something that we pride ourselves on, is holding ourselves to a standard that's really high. And if we say we're going to do it, we do it. And because we've done that consistently, way before my time, way, way, way before my time, that we've consistently been able to do that, we've obviously gained the respect. And I can tell you that we're able to sit down at a table and do just like you said. We can take the critique and take opportunities to grow just as much as we can sit down at the table and say, hey, we need you to take opportunity to grow too.
Could you talk a little bit more in depth about the development you have seen within the law enforcement in your communities since you have kind of started partnering and educating them? Like, how have you seen that really change within how they're interacting with survivors who come in to report, how they're interacting with you guys, just like kind of overall? I just kind of want to understand how, like, what the improvements have been and how it has really benefited your guys' communities.
Yeah, if I had the time, I would sit here and call their names out individually because I think it's worthy of calling their names out. But our police chiefs and our sheriffs and our prosecutors here have, and it's hard to even explain how far it's come compared to other places, I can tell you. But I think our law enforcement officers here have truly believed that there is a thing called trauma and what trauma can do to the brain. And, teaching them and them buying into the questions that they ask 20 minutes after an assault could change over time. And, that sequence narrative that we often talk about, the file folders that's all disheveled and how we get those put into the right order. But the people that sit at the end of the table in those organizations have said these law enforcement organizations are going to respond with a trauma informed response, and we're going to make that a priority. And quite frankly, those sheriffs and chiefs that I'm talking about are the ones that are often in the field showing how that's done. It's not just preaching it. They've sit down and said, no, we're going to do this, and this is the organization that we're going to do it with, so that when they, the new investigator that's only been there a couple months talks to a client the first time, they've already had that training. They've taught them about trauma. They set the expectation on how we're going to talk to survivors, how we're going to communicate with survivors, the questions we just are not going to ask, and the hard questions that we're going to ask, and how we're going to explain that. And it's so cool to watch a law enforcement officer who really knows what they're doing come in and have really hard conversations with somebody and be truly understanding of what it means to be a survivor of sexual assault.
Yeah. Have you guys experienced any hesitations or pushback at all from law enforcement at any time?
I mean, you always are going to be met with resistance, right?
Mhm.
No matter what, because change is hard. Change is hard for me. Change is hard for anybody. And obviously, you always have those people that are going to be like, well, we've done it like this for 20 years, or we've done it like this for however long it may be. And I think that goes back to the conversation of value and what our agency provides as a value to them. And so we just sit down and we have a conversation and say, like, hey, if you give this a shot and we try it this way, here's what our agency is going to do to ensure that when we get to the final step, trial, we've done everything in our power to get this person to be able to stand up in trial. They have to stand there, they have to stand up and point at the person who did this to them in a courtroom and tell their story and be able to tell that in a chronological, well thought out story so that a jury of people who weren't there and have no idea what happens can see the truth.
And I also think that, at least from an outsider's perspective, I would think that's also where you have such a value add. And I know you said this at the beginning of the podcast, but kind of just talking about how you were in law enforcement and you technically still are. And so you can go to law enforcement and be like, I've been in your shoes. And like, I understand your point of view and I understand this point of view, and you can really bridge that together. And I just think that is super powerful. And I also hope that your guys' organization being able to have this impact, not only on just victims and like the advocacy part of it, but also very, very holistically in your community. I really hope that it can bring hope to other areas and hope for the fact that there can be more organizations like Gulf Coast who can create these relationships that just make the whole entire process at least a little bit better for people who decide to go through it. Because I think that it can be really frightening and it can feel like it's really easy to lose hope. And to look at what you guys are doing and the impact that it is having and the fact that you can see it. It's not just like, yeah, like we're hoping this would happen. Like you have seen the change that you guys have been hoping to create. And I just think that is really, really amazing, especially in this regard, because so many people have had really tough experiences when they go through the reporting process and when they've talked to law enforcement, and to see that there is an actual good going on in this area, I just think is really great.
Yeah, and obviously, I was told when I was leaving law enforcement from a person that I was worked with for a long time. He was my supervisor for most of my career. He said, "I'm going to give you a little tip. Don't go over there and go talk about how you did it.
Mm.
Go over there, and when you have a problem with law enforcement, just ask for them to respect you enough to look at it." And I've really taken that to heart. And so when there's a case that's come up and, I don't go in and say, "Let me tell you how I would do this," or "Here's what this needs to happen," or "Here's who needs to go to jail," or here's I don't know who doesn't need to go to jail. I've never done that. I've kind of prided myself on doing that. And because of that, I think it's allowed me to gain some respect. If I call one of those investigators that I worked with, who are most of them are now supervisors, and saying, look, brother, I need you to dig just a little bit further.
Mhm.
Look one more place. And, I don't hold resentment when they don't do it the way that I would do it either, because they have their own tools and tricks and all the ways that they've been trained that, quite frankly, I've not had now.
So many times we hear that. I don't know if you could call it a cliche at this point, but it's that thing of like, I went in to report and they asked me that question of what I was wearing, and they didn't believe me right away, and I was met with a lot of questions instead of just one sentence of, I'm really sorry that you went through that, like, let's take the next steps. And so in order to kind of shift that narrative, you had to think about, okay, how would I want to be communicated with as a law enforcement officer? And law enforcement had to be able to take that leap and say, okay, what would it be like to be in a survivor's shoes? And because you were kind of able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and look at it from a different perspective, they're not coming out of reporting to law enforcement saying that was a horrible experience. They're actually coming out saying, I believe that this perpetrator could be put behind bars. I feel supported. I feel cared for. And I think that's one of the biggest pieces that we seem to be missing these days.
Well, and if I could put my 2 cents in on something,
Absolutely.
something that I believe wholeheartedly is, if you start investigations by believing first, you get the same outcome as if you started your investigation by not believing.
Mm.
And it that's a hard switch to make, but let's start by believing survivors first, because every law enforcement officer who's been doing this for more than a couple, year or two has says that they've worked that one case where somebody wasn't telling the truth. Now, I think I could probably argue that boat for a long day too, but that's a story for another day. But, if that instance is possibly have happened, you would have still gotten the same result and found the same information if you would have just started the conversation by believing them, and then let the story tell you otherwise, if you truly believe that didn't happen. But we know the statistics when it comes to that too. And that's something that we've really stuck to law enforcement, to encourage them to start their investigations by just believe them.
Mm.
Just believe
Mhm.
them and ask the facts. And if something gets mixed up and they say the truck was blue when really it was black, or it was, heck, even if it was red, let's just ask, because we know what trauma brain looks like. We know how trauma processes, and it'd be very easy for somebody to say it was a red truck when really it was blue,
Mm.
or something along those lines. It doesn't mean that they're lying. It doesn't mean that they're not telling you the truth. It doesn't mean they're even trying to deceive you. It just,
Mhm.
when are you asking those questions? And I'll go a little bit further into that if you don't mind.
Yes,
um
please. That's
you
why
know
you're here.
law
Yeah.
enforcement has 72 hours to make a statement if they're involved in an officer involved shooting. We often drag survivors of sexual assault into a room moments after that sexual assault happened, and start asking them questions, and expect that they can replay all the information that we need in order to conduct a criminal investigation. And I think that's something we need to look at. And that's what's so cool here. Our law enforcement here locally, if we don't have a public safety issue, are okay with saying, hey, go get you a sleep or two, and let's talk about this in a day or two. Obviously, we understand that when there's public safety issues, that can't happen, and we're never going to encourage that to happen, because we obviously don't want somebody else to have to experience that either. But there's a lot of that we we just need to think about sometimes.
Yeah, I think that support aspect is just so needed, and I think that is just so valuable. And kind of going back to what you were talking about, how trauma impacts our memory and our brain in really weird ways. And so when you can educate law enforcement officers, even like lawyers and whoever's a part of these processes, and help them understand that sometimes survivors are going to be talking about their story, and they're going to have to talk about their story 30 different times, and there might be some things that they describe as different throughout the whole time, and that is normal, and how trauma just makes our brain all wonky, and we can kind of get our memory messed up in a little bit of different ways. And so I think that educating them on that too is just so vital to then kind of altogether bring in a more supportive outcome when survivors do choose to go and report.
If you didn't know anything about the trauma brain, or even just the slight differences that can happen, not even like the psychology behind it, but just the minor ways that it impacts memory and the fight, flight, freeze sort of thing. And if you didn't understand any of that, and someone is sitting there telling you their story for a second time and the truck is blue instead of red, then it can be like one of those things of, well, now I need to question your credibility. Your story isn't necessarily the same that it was when you told me yesterday. And that's the problem, because the truck can be red and it can be blue, but also at the same time, is that the detail that we really care about? But that's a conversation for another day.
Yeah, and I'll answer, the detail is important.
Okay.
Yeah, the detail is important, but is the detail that important today?
Mm.
Is sometimes the questions that we have to ask. It's our job as victim advocates in a rape crisis center and a children's advocacy center to be there and to support them. And if they call back the next day and be like, oh my gosh, I said the wrong color, or I said this, or to say, hey, that's okay, let's call them, we'll set up a meeting, we can sit down and we can talk about it. And then we have the opportunity to call that law enforcement officer and be like, hey, let me educate you real quick on how this could be possible and why this could have happened this way. And then they have the opportunity and go and get that information, because it's going to come up at some point. We know it is throughout the criminal justice process, and we definitely don't want it to come up the day of trial.
Right.
You guys are kind of like consultants.
Yeah, you can say that. I mean, it is such a huge part of our job is to be the, we call them the conductor of the orchestra. That's who our advocates, who is what we kind of term them as, is they're the person who's trying to make all these instruments make one note that sounds like it's supposed to sound. And I can tell you, it's a not an easy job. They get put in the middle and they play Switzerland a lot and a lot of really hard conversations. But they're also not afraid to stand on the truth and really advocate for somebody when right is right and wrong is wrong.
I have a question. I don't know how you'll answer this, but I'm just very curious. So, you've mentioned that the details are important, which, yeah, absolutely. So, as a survivor of sexual assault, when you're telling your story, there's, details that you remember and detail and big moments that you don't remember at all. And there's always this feeling of, if my story is too perfect and like everything is too perfect all the time, then it must be made up. But if I'm changing details and things like aren't adding up and the story is different every time I tell it, then I must be lying. So, how often are the details the thing that separates the case from moving forward or not? How often are the details the thing that are the most important?
Every time. A law enforcement officer, from the time they start investigating a case, is constantly thinking, what is this going to look like in front of 6 people that don't have a clue?
Mm.
And we have no idea who those 6 people can be. Heck, we may get lucky and there be a survivor on that jury, or we may just pull the crap straw that day and get the person who's raped 5 people and never got arrested for it, sitting on that jury. And you've got to convince 6 random people that your story is in fact true in the scenario that the perpetrator is saying it never happened, or whatever we want to say there. But you have to remember, in a trial, you have a defense attorney that their job, I'm not knocking them, is to sit there and pick each one of those details apart to try, their job's not to prove that you're telling the truth or lying. It's just to put deception in a jury.
Right.
And the color of the truck can be all the deception that there has to be. You saying it's red when it was really blue could put one person on that jury saying, I'm not sure. Right. And so we, as law enforcement officers in our law enforcement community, are constantly thinking about that from the time they sit down with you the first time. They're thinking, how do I get all the details about this to where, when, quite frankly, you as the survivor are going to have to answer these questions, to where it's not even a question that hopefully gets to come up. We know it's red. We found the truck and it was red, right? Because if you say it's red and you tell us 5 times it was red and we go find the truck and it's blue, what's the automatic thing that's going to happen there?
Oh, she's lying.
Right. And I'm not saying that law enforcement is going to say that. That law enforcement officer may be really, really smart and understand what trauma does, and may come back to you and be like, hey, let's talk about that truck again. You're like, oh my God, it's blue. But let's say we didn't go back and do that, and we get on the stand the day that you have to testify to it, and they pull up a picture of his truck. And they're like, my client wasn't there. They were driving a red truck that day. Right. Something crazy like that. So I think some people would be easy to say we get lost in the details as law enforcement officers, but that's also where it's important to remember law enforcement's fact and we're not. Our job is to believe survivors, and we do that. And whatever the details are about the facts, really, quite frankly, aren't important to us. So like, if we get assigned a case and we don't know all the details, I'm not encouraging my staff. I'm telling them not to go read the law enforcement reports because, quite frankly, what does it matter? What do the details matter to us? I constantly say, did he or she say that she is a survivor of sexual assault? Yeah, then we're going to help them. And we tell law enforcement that, like, you worry about the facts, let us worry about the feelings.
I have a lot of issues with the whole criminal justice system as a whole, but that like is not something I'm even gonna bring up because it would take too much time. But I
This is
do
the
think
time, Lauren. This is our person. She's here to
Yeah,
answer all the questions.
yeah.
we can we can
One day we'll change the criminal justice system to give survivors as much rights as defendants. And I can say, I am proud to live in the state of Florida. It's not a political thing. It has nothing to do with politics. I'm a father of 2 children, a daughter and a son. I'm a husband. All those things come obviously before my career, which unfortunately my family has taken that on as their career. Also, thankfully, I have that support. But Marcy's law and state statute here in the state of Florida have given survivors so many rights, and it's amazing to know that for one, we're going to hold people accountable for doing that here, and we're going to put a lot of force of the legal system against somebody who does that. And I'm proud to live here. I'm proud to be a part of the system here in the state of Florida. I know a lot of states, we talk about this with other states throughout the country about how lenient their laws are related to sexual assault and child abuse. In the state of Florida, if someone over the age of 18 sexually assaults somebody under the age of 12, the minimum that they can be put in prison is life.
wow.
And we're proud of that, and we're not going to get into the argument ever of, all the right and wrong. We're going to hold people accountable for doing what they did to somebody. And we're proud to be in a place that does that. And our legal system backs that up. If they get found from a jury that says they did it, they can go on and expect to spend the rest of their life. And there's no parole. It's day to day.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really awesome. And I definitely, look at cases like that where it helps me feel better and it helps me have hope that we can continue to create more laws that give more rights to victims. And I last semester had the chance to talk to a Colorado senator about this, and that was really cool. And not that anything will come of it, but he really cared what I had to say. And so that also helps me realize that, these people in power sometimes care about these issues and do want to create change. So hopefully that is something that we can continue working towards.
Just look at history when you think about those things, because they can seem like mountains that you're trying to climb, right?
Mm-hmm.
You just have to look at that and say you planted a seed, and it's your job and people like me and all the others, and hopefully healthy survivors that can go and continue to water that seed and get it to where we need it to be. Obviously Florida didn't get to where we were today overnight. Those conversations have been happening for probably decades, to tell you the honest truth. I don't get involved in that as much as Lori gets involved. She spends a significant amount of time working on legislation and has moved that needle really far forward in the state of Florida, along with some huge champions in our state who are on the legislative end that really want to make sure that people are held accountable for what they do.
Yeah, I love that. That's awesome.
So, when we had our initial conversation, we had talked about compassion fatigue. And for those who don't know what compassion fatigue is, it's a term that describes the physical, emotional, and psychological impact of helping others, often through experiences of stress or trauma. And so, the other version of that is just it can be really exhausting to be in a job or a passion project where you are helping others constantly. So, could you explain a little bit to our audience about how you cope with seeing so many cases that are truly devastating on a daily basis?
Well, I'm going to preface this, and I think some people are going to think it's crazier to say that I have been blessed to do this for the amount of years that I've been doing it, and really have never had that struggle. But I'm going to go back to say I have an incredible support team. Obviously, I have a wife at home that supports this work. She didn't sign up for this. I was a business owner when she met me, and when we got married, she didn't sign up to be a husband of or a wife of a cop, or dang sure didn't sign up to be a wife of a chief operations officer of one of the largest children's advocacy centers and rape crisis centers in the country. But she knows how I feel about this work, and she knows how important it is to teach my children about this line of work too. And then our support system at work is just absolutely phenomenal. We talk about this. I feel like some days it's all we talk about is how do we support our staff and the work that they're doing. Because, obviously some days I sit behind the desk and answer, the hard questions about how we're going to operate as an organization or an agency, or how we're going to spend money, or something crazy that our staff is not the responsibility to make, but they're in the trenches doing this, and they're hearing the stories all day long for hours upon hours. And our agency has decided to tackle that with a really head-on approach. We talk about it. We have an EAP program that a lot of our staff use. We encourage them to use it. If we see staff that are having that look on their face, I'm the first one to go and say, you've got time off. Why don't you take today? Whatever task you've got today, somebody else can step in and help. And our teams truly function that way as a team. Their leaders within their individual teams are tasked with making sure that is something they keep on top of, constantly having one-on-one conversations with their staff members to talk about that, and just ask the simple question, how are you? And when the tears start or that blank face comes, it's time to have a few days off. And we encourage that through some of our policies at our agency. We have a mandatory, you must take 5 consecutive work days off every year. And we give them that time. We give so much time for vacation and sick. We give personal days, 11 holidays a year. I think I figured it out one time. Somebody has to work over just 9 months a year here out of the 12 to actually show up to work every day. And we've implemented the flexible work schedules. We give everybody the opportunity to work at home certain amount of days a month, or to work 4 10-hours days, or however when they want to start or whenever they want to leave. Worked really hard to come up with all those things. Today they were having a big pizza party for Employee Appreciation Day at the office. Obviously that doesn't do anything really is in the big picture of things, but it's just hopefully that we're showing them that we appreciate them for the hard work that they do. And self-care gets brought up into this conversation a lot. We do the self-care wheels with our staff. We do all this stuff. But what we've been trying to talk about to our staff a lot is to remind staff that, I heard this person say it, and I wish I could go back and find it. And they said, let's quit calling it self-care and call it self-love, because self-care is something we have to prove to somebody else, and self-love is internal. And it was something that when it was said, it's just stuck to me, because I've always been the person that I didn't need to have this huge regimen of things to do to keep me healthy. My wife will call me out when I need to be called out. If I've worked 14 too many hours that day and my kids are saying, where's dad? Hey, they're asking where dad is. And that's hey, I need to leave at 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon to come home and, be daddy too. But, I have things that I do. I am a beach bum through and through.
Heck yeah.
If it's summertime and I can be on our boat with my children and my wife and my parents and my mother-in-law on the island, that's where we're going to be. I can still talk on the phone there. I can still answer all the questions, or I'll be in the pool in the backyard. But our staff connect together a lot, and I think that helps with a lot of this. If I'm having a bad day, I call Lori and I just lose it. Let me tell you about this injustice, or let me tell you about that. And we kind of have a mutual thing to say, we're just going to listen to each other. We have a 24-hour break before we bring it back up. So call, vent it out. 24 hours later, we'll bring it back up and we'll talk about solutions. That self-love thing is something important, but I think having just a group of people around you that just really support and understand, because obviously I don't get to come home and talk about the work that I do every day. Right. I don't want to expose my family to that, much like law enforcement, firefighters, nurses, all the people. But yeah, compassion fatigue is a real thing. We've seen it, but we try our hardest to set examples as supervisors and administrators of our agency, but also put into our actual policies to encourage people to almost make them do some of that.
I have 2 thoughts. First one is that, in order to help others, you have to help yourself first. And that's exactly where you guys have founded your policies on, and why you guys are creating such change, because you're taking the care and putting the time in to work on yourself and make sure that everyone is able to sort of carry this weight that survivors and victims are putting on you guys. And I mean that not in a negative way. It's just that they need your support, and that's what you guys are there for. But you can't give them the right care unless all of your employees are starting with self-love, not self-care, self-love. That's what we're calling it now. And my second thing is, are you guys hiring?
I feel like that's something that happens about every other week around here. Thankfully, it's not because of retention. We have an amazing retention rate. But I think there's an important thing to say about our work that a lot of people don't think about. If I can talk as an administrator for just a few minutes, obviously, the vast majority of people that get into my line of work have their own story, and they bring that story with them to work every day too. And so we have to be a little hyper focused on some of this stuff more than maybe a manufacturing plan or a sales force that's, manufacturing a car or selling a product. They bring their own experiences, and unfortunately their experiences is the work that they're doing too. And we know that, we see that. And I most certainly am not afraid. And I'm gonna brag on Lori for a minute, and she'll probably told you this when you talked to her earlier. I don't do it a whole lot because we treat each other like brother and sister most of the time. But I've never seen anybody who can go in and have a really hard conversation with somebody about how they're bringing their own trauma to the workforce in such a compassionate way to say, man, your story matters, but we've got to focus on our victim and our survivor here. And we've got to make sure that we keep that outside of how we're helping people. Not that your story doesn't matter. It most certainly does, but we're not going to put our story on somebody else too.
Because their
And
weight
that's
is already so heavy too.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably, I don't know. I don't obviously go around and ask our staff how many of you have been abused in your lifetime, but it most certainly, we know that it's probably north of 90% of our staff. And that's not just at our agency, that's across the country. I would be very positive to say is the workforce that does this work.
Brent, we just really want you to talk about Voyager for a couple minutes.
Oh, yeah.
It's our last question. We loved what you're talking about with the dog therapy for survivors, and I think everyone would just love to hear about it.
Everyone loves dogs. This world
Everyone
is
loves
so heavy.
dogs.
We need some lightness. Talk to
Yeah,
us.
absolutely. Let me throw a little sales pitch out for Canine Companions. Go look them up. It's just caninecompanions.org. But back when I started, Lori came to me and says, hey, this dog thing, man, people have this incredible connection to animals, and we're missing it. Can you get that figured out? And I said, oh, wow. Okay, let me figure it out. And I can't tell you how much research I did. I've read everything you can possibly read. I've asked more questions to people, and we really found out that we wanted to start that through utilizing Canine Companions for a facility dog. And so that organization raises, breeds their own dogs, and they put them through training just through like an ADA certified real service dog. But they have dogs that they allow to go to facilities, and that's what they call them, facility dogs. So he's incredibly intelligent. When he was first trained, I couldn't tell you all the things he can do, from turning off lights to opening refrigerators to pulling your laundry basket and putting the clothes in the wash machine and dryer for you. He probably could do it all still if he wanted to today. But kind of what they do is they he has the ability just to use his weight and his presence to help ground. So when we have survivors who are going to depositions or trial or in therapy, I have the opportunity. He stays with me. I wish I would have thought to bring him in here and prop him up. He'd be sitting in my lap, but he weighs like 73 pounds. He's half lab and half golden. But he's there with me, and we just interact with our clients. But I'm going to tell you, one of the coolest things that we didn't know we were getting as a byproduct of having him is what he does for our staff. And, it is so cool to see. And, I can talk about a really cool story to kind of give you the happy there. We had a really small child who was legitimately raised by dogs and had no adult interaction for a significant amount of time. And our agency was just not really sure how we were going to be able to support this client, but knew that was ours to do and that we were going to find the way. And so I always thought that it would be really cool to teach Voyager hand sign language, so that when we were in court, I wouldn't have to give him verbal commands for him to do. Because part of our process here locally is the jury doesn't even know that he's in the courtroom. They have no idea that there's even a dog in the courthouse when this happens, when we go in with clients. So I thought it would be really cool if we could just teach them some sign language. With that client coming to our office every day for several weeks, we utilized her connection to animals, dogs specifically, and her inability to communicate significantly well to help teach him sign language. So, like 5 or 6 of his commands, he knows the actual American Sign Language sign to do that. So, if I want him to sit down, I can tell him to sit down or stop or lay down. Some of the things that he knows to stay. So, it is so cool to watch how some of our clients have just really interacted with him. And, we go to trial and they're like, oh, I want Voyager to go. And we write a motion to the court and the judge approves him coming. And we have a process set up so the jury doesn't know he's there, like I was talking about. And we encourage our clients just to wear sandals to trial, and they just take them off and he gets underneath the table and he just rubs them. And just that sensation that clients, it's like it's just another person that's there to be there and to be such a support to our survivors as they go through this process. And it's so cool to see. He's almost 7 years old now. So we've had him for 4 years, and he's a super chill, but he thinks he's a little bitty lap dog.
I love that. That's just so awesome. I wish I had a doggy with me when I was in court. I
So
think everyone can relate.
we've kind of expanded that. We have bunnies now that are in our therapy office. We even have little doors that go between our therapy rooms that the bunny can hop through. Oh yeah, it's super cool. And like I visually, I can't explain it any better than this is not a bunny that you think you see in the picture. This is a dog. It is huge. It is a massive bunny. I don't even know the name, like what kind it is. If I told you, it'd be the wrong one. But a really cool thing about bunnies, if I can tell you why it's so cool to do therapy with bunnies, they have the biggest flight or flight reaction out of all the animals. So like when kids come in and get on the floor with them and like the bunny just freezes or it takes off and runs, it's such a cool experience to be able to teach children how their behavior or what they did when they were being victimized too, that was just a natural reaction that they're an animal. And they've used it as such a big teaching moment for our especially our like middle school and younger kids.
My heart is just melting. Oh my goodness. Like the sight of a younger child being confused about, what's going on in their life, not to mention they've just experienced a huge trauma and they're just confused and maybe they're being hard on themselves, and then being able to show them this bunny and say, you're just like this bunny. Like it's okay. This is natural. I just I cannot even, like, I just want to cry. That is so incredible.
Right? Animals are so cool. And I'm not an animal person, so it's kind of weird that I have the animal. But one other really cool thing that he does and has done pretty consistent is obviously when kids have to come in for medical exams, especially if they're sexual assault exams, that'd be something that's very traumatic to anybody, adults, much less really small children. And we have utilized him multiple times to demonstrate how that's going to work. So he jumps up on the medical bed, rolls over, and the doctor just shows the kid how they're going to do the exam on him. And of course, he thinks it's amazing because he's getting belly rubs during this. And the kid's like, "Well, if he can do it, then I can do it too." And we've utilized him for if kid comes and doesn't want to get out of the car, taking him out there, and they're like, "Hey, I want to feed him Cheez-Its." Well, he doesn't get that kind of food, but I guess to be able to help you, I most certainly will let him eat Cheez-Its and let him throw up all day later.
Oh my
Oh my
goodness.
goodness. Okay, well, that was the perfect way to end this episode, just on a very happy, giddy note. But yeah, before we close out, is there anything else that you would want to share with our audience?
Let me say I believe you, and I want you to know that there are people that are in this world who believe you and are out there fighting a fight that you probably don't know that they're fighting on your behalf. And I hope that if it ever comes to a time that you have to interact with somebody, that they are competent and capable of helping you in the way that you deserve to be. But even if not, just know that there are people out here who believe you and support you. And kudos to you too for putting yourself out there to say the things that you say and say them bluntly, and to say that you're a survivor yourself. I appreciate that. There are some things that obviously you can say that I won't ever be able to say in a public forum. And I appreciate you doing that. And appreciate you letting me give you a perspective that maybe you've never had before.
Brent, thank you so much for being here. It was so incredible to be able to talk to you, and I'm sure that our audience is just going to love you and be begging for you to come back on and talk more about all of this law enforcement perspective and every other perspective and topic that you can speak on that Lauren and I aren't able to. We commend you so much for being a voice for survivors who can't be a voice for themselves. And it's incredible to be able to talk to someone who is actively creating change and who is able to see it happen. It's just amazing. We just think that you are so awesome. And we hope to see more organizations like Gulf Coast in the future. We're going to link all of Gulf Coast information and everything in the description below. So if you guys want to follow them and check them out and learn more about what they do, everyone we've talked to at Gulf Coast has been so amazing and is so knowledgeable and has such a big heart for survivors. And they're the exact type of people that I want to have around. So with that being said, we love you guys so much. We'll catch you on the flip side and cheers.
Cheers, everyone.